Welcome back to Andy Cooks, the show where me, Andy, professional chef, brings you along on my home cooking journey. And today we're talking about gnocchi. So, gnocchi. It's a dish that seems to intimidate some people from making it at home, but it's really not super complicated, but it is a tricky recipe to write down in recipe form. There's a bit of technique involved and a bit of intuition that you need to take to make sure you get your gnocchi perfect. And you're gonna, over time, when you make it a bit more, your intuition or your feel for the dough will get a lot better. And why it's tricky is because of the potatoes. So how you cook the potato, what potato you've got, there's so many factors into how much moisture you end up with your potato at the end. So we're going to talk about general rule of thumbs here, but don't be afraid to, when you're making your dough with your potatoes, if you think it needs a little bit more flour or a little bit less, don't be afraid to use your intuition on this one. So let's get stuck in today. This is what you're going to need. But before we do that, if you could just hit that like button, it helps me out immensely. If you take anything from these videos at all, I'd really appreciate it. It just gets that algorithm ticking. All right, let's get stuck in. All right, so for the gnocchi itself, you're gonna need potatoes, obviously. So these are a Dutch cream potato. A Sebago works really well, or a Russet, or anything that you're using for chips, basically. You want a floury potato. Eggs. So we've got 2 eggs here, but you will need a couple of eggs. And flour. Just an all-purpose flour works fine, or if you've got some kind of cake flour or low protein flour, that also works really well. Some Parmesan cheese, some butter for the sauce, and salt. That's pretty much all you're gonna need for the gnocchi part. Now, where you go from there is kind of a choose your own adventure. You can just boil the gnocchi and then put them into any type of ragu, like a beef ragu or a pork ragu. Or I'm gonna do some romesco cauliflower and some silver chard with some burnt butter. I'm also gonna pan fry my gnocchi at the end. I prefer the pan fried ones compared to just the blanched ones and into a sauce. I just like the crunchier texture on the outside, just a personal preference thing. I'm not too sure if gnocchi are very often pan fried in Italy, but I prefer that style over just the boiled ones. I find them to be probably a little bit too light and fluffy. I like that textural component on the outside. So first things first, we need to get these spuds into an oven, just dry on a tray, 180-degree oven, and we're gonna do that for about an hour and a half or an hour and 10. We'll start checking them, but you want them soft. So super simple, on a tray, take your spud with a fork, prick it about 3 times on each side. All that does is give somewhere for the steam to come out. Often restaurants will also put these on a bed of like really coarse rock salt, and that also helps to just draw some moisture out, but at home I don't tend to bother. All right, so these go in 180-degree oven, and we'll come back in an hour and check them. All right, literally 1 hour later, and our spuds are cooked. You can see that the outside is a little bit crunchy and the inside is soft, proper soft, like put a knife right through it. So what we need to do next is to cut these open and scoop the middles out. But what I like to do is to slice them open. Be careful, do it on a board if you don't feel safe. Just like that. And just let them steam a little bit. And that way they're gonna dry out a little bit more. So we're gonna cut those open like that. Also makes it easier to handle if they're cooler, a little bit cooler, before we start scooping the flesh out. And then while we're waiting for that to cool off and some of the steam to escape, we'll start, oh that's hot, ooh, maybe use a tea towel. We will start preparing our garnish. Okay, definitely use a tea towel. Don't be a numpty like me. Anyway, leave those at the back just to steam a bit. So, the garnish. Now, I found this at the market the other day. Romanesco, part of the cauliflower family, Brachius family, I believe. And you can basically treat this like you would a cauliflower. So all I'm gonna do is take the florets off, or not all of them because there's only 2 of us for dinner. Take some of the florets off and we're just gonna roast them. That amount will do, save the rest for something else. So just cut those into manageable sized pieces. Tell me about that big. And on a tray and roast them. Now gnocchi can be, it goes really well with just butter, parmesan and some sage. I couldn't find any sage when I was looking yesterday, so I can't really do that. But any kind of spring vegetable, lightly sauteed, works really well. A little bit of goat's cheese is nice on there as well. There's so many options apart from kind of the traditional you know, ragu style. So we're going to roast those quickly, and then we're going to chop up some chard that will saute just before we put the gnocchi in, and we're laughing. So florets into a roasting tray. Now turn the oven up to 200 degrees. Drizzle of olive oil and some salt. So I'm going to prep this chard quickly. We're going to keep the stems and the leaves separate because the stems will take a little bit more cooking than the leaves will. Into a bowl with these bigger ones. Take it out quite far. Just going to give this a rinse underwater, and we're going to rinse this underwater as well, and we'll set that aside for later. Onto the main attraction again, the gnocchi. So I've got a set of scales here and a sheet pan which I've zeroed out, and then I've got my moulie. So this is a moulie which basically pushes potato through a set of holes underneath. Really fantastic little kitchen gadget to have. You can also use a ricer. You can use a fork or a masher, but if you're going to do that, just be careful you don't overwork it. So our potatoes have steamed down a little bit. I'm going to take a spoon and hot tip, keep the skins. They make really good potato jackets. I used to eat so many potato jackets in the restaurants. Or fried potato skins, just cover them in oil and put them back in the oven. They crisp up really nicely. And you just kind of pull the flesh out of the inside. All right, so now we've got all our flesh pulled out. Just make sure that tray's on 0, it is. I'm just gonna push this potato through. So the general rule of thumb, and like I was saying at the start, you do have to use your intuition a little bit, but is for every 500 grams of cooked potato, you add 1 egg yolk and 100 grams of flour. In restaurants, or if the home cooks that make this a lot, you can kind of get away with guessing this, but I do suggest if it's one of your first times making it, start with those ratios and then see where you're at. So this is going to be basically bang on 500 grams, which is nice and easy. So spread that out. We'll get our egg yolk. So just before you pour it on, break the yolk up a bit so that it doesn't all go in one place. And then you want 100 grams of flour. Some salt. Now we start pushing it together. Now take your scales out from underneath. Don't need those anymore. And just start working this dough in together. The trick is with gnocchi is to work the dough as little as possible. Now, you don't want lumpy dough, but at the same time, you don't want to overwork it, because if you overwork it, you get stodgy gnocchi. So you can kind of use a bit of a cutting action as well, I find helps, just to evenly distribute that yolk. Doing it on a tray, you can do it on a bench, straight on a bench, it's nice and clean, but doing it on a tray is nicer because it makes cleanup a lot easier. So once it looks like most of the ingredients are relatively evenly distributed, bring it together. Start making it into the dough. Make sure you get it all off the bottom. And then once you've got your formed dough, you can ditch your tray. I'm going to keep it there to put on gnocchi on. But we'll flour our board a little bit. Flour our tray. So that's where we're going to put them once we've rolled them. And just knead this dough until it's nice and smooth. You're looking at about 60 to 90 seconds. That's kind of all it's going to take. All right, and there's our dough. So, time to shape them. Cut it into half, keeping your board nice and dusted, and roll it out. If it starts getting too hard or big to manage, just cut it in half again. So you want to roll it out so it's about the thickness of maybe a bit thicker than your thumb. I like fairly decent sized gnocchi. I don't like it when they're super small. And there's a bunch of different shapes that you can do. So cut that in half. And you're just going to cut them. Cut and flick. Like so. Now that is a perfectly acceptable shape to have as a gnocchi, and it's actually the shape I prefer when you're doing it this style, like we're going to pan fry it. There's a whole bunch of other ways. You can use a fork, and you can roll it down the back of a fork, which gives it some lines on it like that. What that's good for is when you're doing it into a ragu, because it gives something the ragu to stick to. You can also just push your pinky into it and put a divot into it. Also creates a nice crater for a ragu. But I prefer this one. Super simple. If anything, I'll just pinch them up a little bit more. Just gives them a bit more of an hourglass shape as I'm moving them. Now try and avoid them from sticking to or touching each other, because as soon as they touch each other, they will stick. So get them onto the tray, continue going. Now, hot tip at this point, if you froze that tray like it was right there, without the gnocchi touching overnight, then you can put them into a Tupperware container or a Ziploc bag. They keep pretty well frozen, and then you do the last step that we're about to do from frozen, and they probably take a couple extra minutes to cook, but that's kind of a perfectly acceptable way, because it's a bit of a process making gnocchi. It's not, you know, a 2-minute job. It's kind of a weekend job. So freezing them is a good way to have gnocchi in your freezer during the week. All right, I'm gonna bash the rest of these gnocchi out, and then we're on to the final step. So, next step from here is that we're gonna blanch them. Then straight from the pot, they're gonna go into the saute pan with the rainbow chard. And we're done. And because there's only 2 of us for dinner tonight, I've made way too much. So I will freeze some of these down. Let's go. All right, so here we have a large pot of boiling water, salted boiling water, and our gnocchi. We're gonna put the gnocchi in here. Once they come to the boil and they start floating, we're gonna take them out and we're gonna put them in our foamy butter. It's all gonna happen pretty quickly now. So the idea is we're gonna put our gnocchi in here. As soon as we put those in here, we'll put butter in here and start sauteing our rainbow chard. By the time they're ready, they can go in there and we're good to go. So gnocchi's in. Olive, you're gonna get burnt out the way. Silly doggy. Oh, careful if you've got kids doing that. That wasn't very smart. They'll start boiling. We'll give this a little mix just so that they don't stick, but they look like they're pretty good. As soon as that comes up to the boil and they float, they go in there. That fry pan's already on. Some butter in there. And you do want some good color on your butter. Then goes our chard. Woo! And the water. And just saute that down. All right, so these are starting to float now. You want them to properly float before you take them out. By the magic of television, these pots have swapped. I wanted the hot one with the butter. These have started to float. So we're gonna pull these out into the butter. Now don't be too worried about getting a bit of that pasta water in there. That's gonna emulsify into your sauce. Just roll these around the pan, get a little bit of color. Now I use non-salted butter, so I am going to add a little bit of salt, but be careful if you're using salted butter, which is perfectly fine. You probably don't need a great deal of seasoning. You can see here we're already starting to form some nice color. We're just going to add our washed chard leaves and saute those down a little bit. And our roasted romesco. Now, as soon as that's sauteed down, we're ready to serve. All right, a couple of plates out. So this is a fairly rich dish, so you don't need, you know, a massive plate of it. By the time you put the cheese on there as well, a few bacon lardons wouldn't go astray in here, some pancetta. Some parmesan, make it rain. And just because there's not quite enough fats on there, some really good finishing olive oil. Better save one for babe. And that's it. Some pan-fried gnocchi with rainbow chard and roast romesco. Delicious. bit of parmesan. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the gnocchi that gets a little pan fry on it. Just adds another nice textural component. Absolutely delicious. Have a go at this, guys. Make gnocchi, make a big batch of it, freeze some of it for later in the week. You won't regret it. These compared to the shop bought gnocchi are like worlds apart. It's absolutely delicious. Thanks for watching again, guys. I really appreciate it. Smash that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you're not, and we'll see you next week for another recipe. Peace.